You've been showing up for everyone. Always. But when was the last time someone asked if you were okay without needing something in return? There's a particular kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones when you realize you've become the emergency contact for everyone else's emotional chaos. Not officially, perhaps, but in the quiet understanding that when storms arise in their lives, your phone will ring. Your presence will be expected. Your energy will be required. You've carried this role with such grace, such devotion, that you've forgotten when you first accepted it. Was it chosen, or was it assigned to you by the collective assumption that you are strong enough, stable enough, selfless enough to hold space for everyone's pain while quietly managing your own? Tonight, in this moment of stillness, I want you to feel the weight of what you've been carrying. Not to shame you for it, not to tell you it's wrong, but to acknowledge the profound burden of being everyone's sanctuary while rarely finding your own. You are tired. Not just physically tired, but soul tired. The kind of tired that sleep cannot cure because it comes from giving pieces of yourself away so freely that you've forgotten what wholeness feels like. You've become so accustomed to the rhythm of others' needs that your own desires have become whispers in a world that demands your voice be used for their comfort. And in this tiredness, there's something sacred happening. A quiet rebellion is stirring within you, not against others, but against the version of yourself that believed love meant endless availability, the version that equated worth with usefulness, the version that feared that saying no meant being alone. This is where your journey toward emotional sovereignty begins. Not in anger, not in resentment, but in the gentle recognition that you have been living for everyone except yourself. What you've mistaken for love, for deep connection, for being truly needed, much of it has been something else entirely. It has been dependency masquerading as devotion. It has been the comfort others find in your predictable presence, your reliable reactions, your endless well of empathy that never seems to run dry. Carl Jung once observed, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves." But what Jung didn't say, what becomes clear only in the depths of emotional exhaustion, is that everything others depend on us for reveals what we've been unconsciously seeking in return. Validation, purpose, the illusion of being indispensable. You've been feeding a cycle. They bring their chaos to your doorstep because you've made yourself the most reliable source of the emotional responses they crave. Your concern validates their problems. Your advice makes them feel guided. Your presence makes them feel less alone. But what are you receiving in return? Often, it's the fleeting satisfaction of being needed, a satisfaction that evaporates the moment you're no longer useful. This is not to say that all your relationships are hollow, that every person in your life is using you. But it is to say that many of the people who seek you out in their moments of crisis have never learned to sit with their own discomfort. They've never developed the internal resources to process their emotions independently. Instead, they've learned that you will do this work for them. You've become their external emotional regulation system. When they feel anxious, they call you to feel calm. When they feel lost, they seek your clarity. When they feel unloved, they come to you for affirmation. Your energy has become their coping mechanism, and your presence has become their proof that they matter. But here's what Jung understood about the human psyche. When we consistently seek external validation and support without developing internal strength, we never truly grow. We remain emotionally adolescent, dependent on others to provide what we refuse to cultivate within ourselves. You've been enabling this unconscious arrangement, believing it to be love. But love, true love, creates independence, not dependency. It strengthens the other person's capacity to face life, not their reliance on you to face it for them. There is a profound difference between emotional detachment that comes from woundedness and emotional detachment that comes from wisdom. The first is reactive, protective, born from hurt. The second is conscious, powerful, born from self-respect. What I'm inviting you to consider is not the cold withdrawal of someone who has been betrayed, but the warm, deliberate stepping back of someone who has finally understood their own worth. This is not about building walls. It's about building boundaries. It's not about refusing to care. It's about caring from a place of strength rather than depletion. Carl Jung wrote extensively about psychic energy, the finite resource we each possess that can be directed inward for our own growth or outward in service to others. When this energy is constantly flowing outward without adequate replenishment, we become what Jung called exhausted vessels. We begin operating from emptiness, giving what we no longer have. Friedrich Nietzsche understood this dynamic when he wrote, "He who cannot obey himself will be commanded." If you cannot govern your own emotional boundaries, if you cannot decide when and how to offer your energy, then others will make these decisions for you. They will command your attention, your time, your emotional resources not through force, but through the simple understanding that you've never learned to say no. The psychology of withdrawal, then, is really the psychology of reclamation. You are not withdrawing from love or connection. You are withdrawing from patterns that have disguised themselves as love, but were actually forms of emotional servitude. When you begin to pull back, when you stop responding immediately to every text, when you stop offering unsolicited advice, when you stop making yourself endlessly available, something fascinating happens. The people who have been unconsciously feeding off your energy begin to feel the absence. And in that absence, they are forced to confront something they've been avoiding: themselves. Some will rise to this challenge. They will develop their own emotional resources, learn to sit with their discomfort, and discover that they are more capable than they believed. These relationships will deepen, becoming more authentic and reciprocal. Others will resist. They will try to pull you back into the old patterns through guilt, through accusations of selfishness, through the suggestion that you've changed in some negative way. These responses reveal the true nature of what you thought was connection. It was dependency, and your withdrawal threatens their emotional supply. In a world that demands constant reaction, constant response, constant emotional availability, your silence becomes a revolutionary act. Not the silence of withdrawal or punishment, but the silence of sovereignty, the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needs to explain themselves to be understood. Most people fear silence because silence removes their ability to control your emotional state. When you react, when you explain, when you defend or justify your choices, you hand them the keys to your inner world. Your reactions become their entertainment. Your explanations become their power. Your justifications become their validation that they still matter to you in the old ways. But when you meet their chaos with stillness, their demands with quiet non-compliance, their manipulations with peaceful indifference, something shifts. The power dynamic that has kept you trapped in endless emotional labor begins to dissolve. Niccolò Machiavelli, in his understanding of human nature and power, wrote, "It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both." Now, before you recoil from this idea, understand that Machiavelli wasn't advocating for cruelty. He was recognizing that respect often comes from strength, and strength is often demonstrated through the ability to remain unmoved by others' attempts to manipulate our emotions. In the context of your emotional boundaries, this translates to something profound. It is better to be respected for your boundaries than loved for your availability. If you cannot have both, most people will test your limits, consciously or unconsciously. They will push against your new silence to see if the old reactive you is still accessible. Your silence in these moments, your refusal to be drawn into arguments you didn't start, explanations you don't owe, or emotional labor you didn't agree to perform, becomes a form of communication more powerful than words. It says, "I am no longer available for the version of relationship that requires me to diminish myself for your comfort." This silence isn't cold or cruel. It's warm with self-respect. It's rich with the understanding that your peace is not negotiable, that your energy is precious, that your emotional well-being is not a sacrifice you owe to anyone. And here's what happens in the space that silence creates. People begin to relate to you differently. They approach you with more consideration because they can no longer take your response for granted. They become more mindful of what they bring to you because they understand that your attention is no longer freely given. Your silence teaches them what your words never could, that you are a person of value, not a resource to be consumed. There will come a moment, and you may be in it now, when you realize that much of who you thought you were has been constructed around other people's needs. The helpful one, the understanding one, the one who always has time, always has advice, always has room for one more crisis. This identity felt noble, felt important, felt like love. But as you begin to step away from constant availability, as you begin to honor your own needs and boundaries, this old identity starts to crumble. And with its collapse comes a disorienting question. Who are you when you're not needed? This question can feel terrifying because it suggests that your worth has been conditional on your usefulness, your agreeability, your willingness to put others first. The thought of not being needed can feel like the threat of not being loved, not being valued, not mattering at all. But Carl Jung understood this crisis as a necessary part of what he called individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, separate from the roles and identities that others have assigned to you or that you've adopted to survive. The privilege of a lifetime, Jung wrote, is to become who you truly are. The person you truly are is not the person who exists solely in response to others' needs. The person you truly are has desires, boundaries, dreams, and preferences that exist independently of anyone else's approval or disapproval. This person has been waiting beneath the surface of your endless accommodating, your endless giving, your endless availability. As your old identity as the perpetual helper begins to dissolve, you may feel lost, empty, uncertain. This is not a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that you're doing something necessary. You're creating space for your authentic self to emerge. The people around you may also struggle with this change. They've grown comfortable with the version of you that prioritizes their comfort over your own well-being. When you begin to honor your own needs, when you begin to say no, when you begin to exist for yourself as much as you've existed for them, they may accuse you of being selfish, of changing, of not being the person they fell in love with. These accusations are actually revelations. They reveal that what they loved was not you, but your service to them. They loved not your essence, but your function in their lives. This realization can be painful, but it's also liberating because it frees you from trying to maintain relationships that were built on your self-negation. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes not from being alone, but from being surrounded by people who only know how to love the version of you that serves them. In this loneliness, even when you're physically accompanied, you feel fundamentally unseen. But there's another kind of solitude, one that Jung and Nietzsche both wrote about with reverence. This is the solitude of the person who has chosen themselves, who has decided that their own company is preferable to relationships that require them to abandon their authentic nature. Nietzsche wrote about the Bermensch not as some superior being, but as the person who has evolved beyond the need for external validation, who has developed the courage to define their own values rather than adopting the values that others impose upon them. This person, Nietzsche suggested, often walks alone, not because they cannot connect with others, but because they refuse to connect in ways that diminish their integrity. You may be discovering this solitude now. As you withdraw your energy from relationships that drain you, as you stop performing the emotional labor that others have come to expect, you may find yourself with more time alone. This can feel frightening at first, especially if you've been accustomed to defining yourself through your relationships with others. But in this solitude, something sacred happens. You begin to hear your own voice, not the voice that says what others want to hear, but the voice that speaks your truth. You begin to feel your own desires, not the desires that make you lovable to others, but the desires that make you alive to yourself. This is the loneliness of the strong. It's the solitude of the lion who has left the herd, not in defeat, but in awakening. Not because the herd rejected the lion, but because the lion finally understood that its nature was not meant to be domesticated by the need for constant companionship. In this sacred solitude, you discover that you are not only capable of surviving without constant external validation, you are capable of thriving. You learn that your own thoughts are interesting, that your own company is peaceful, that your own dreams are worth pursuing, even if no one else understands them. This doesn't mean you become a hermit, or that you reject all human connection. It means you become someone who can connect from a place of wholeness rather than need, from a place of choice rather than desperation, from a place of strength rather than depletion. When you are comfortable being alone, when you no longer fear the silence of your own company, you become someone who can only be truly loved because you can no longer be manipulated, used, or taken for granted. Every relationship operates on invisible contracts, unspoken agreements about what each person will give and what each person will receive. Many of your emotional contracts were written when you were younger, more desperate for acceptance, more willing to accept scraps of attention in exchange for unlimited availability. These contracts might sound like, I will be who you need me to be, so you won't leave me. I will solve your problems, so you'll think I'm valuable. I will never burden you with my needs, so you'll see me as low maintenance and lovable. I will always be available for your crisis, so you'll remember that I care. Jung wrote, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. These emotional contracts have been unconscious, directing your relationships from the shadows. You've been honoring agreements you never consciously made, living up to terms you never consciously agreed to. The people around you have also been unconsciously operating under these contracts. They've come to expect your immediate responses, your endless empathy, your willingness to prioritize their emotional needs over your own. They haven't necessarily done this maliciously. They've simply accepted what you've offered and structured their emotional lives around your availability. But now, as you become conscious of these patterns, you have the power to renegotiate or completely dissolve these contracts. This process isn't about punishment or revenge. It's about creating relationships based on conscious choice rather than unconscious habit. When you stop responding immediately to every text, you're renegotiating the contract that says your time belongs to others. When you stop offering unsolicited advice, you're dissolving the contract that makes you responsible for others' decisions. When you stop absorbing others' emotions as if they were your own, you're breaking the contract that made you an unpaid therapist rather than an equal friend. Some people will adjust to these new terms. They will learn to approach you with more consideration, to offer reciprocity, to respect your boundaries. These relationships will deepen and become more authentic. Others will resist the renegotiation. They will try to invoke the old contracts through guilt, manipulation, or accusation. They may say you've become selfish, that you've changed, that you're not the person they used to know. What they're really saying is, you're not honoring the agreement that benefited me at your expense. These reactions are informative. They show you which relationships were built on mutual respect and which were built on your willingness to accept less than you deserved. This knowledge, while sometimes painful, is liberating because it frees you from investing in connections that were never truly equitable. In the space you've created by withdrawing from emotional contracts that depleted you, by choosing silence over reactive explanations, by embracing solitude over desperate connection. In this space, something new is being born. You are being reborn, not as someone different, but as someone more authentically yourself. The version of you that was always there, but was buried beneath layers of other people's expectations, needs, and demands for your energy. This rebirth doesn't happen overnight. It's a gradual process of rediscovering your own rhythms, your own preferences, your own voice. It's the slow work of learning to trust your own judgment after years of prioritizing others' opinions. It's the patient practice of sitting with your own emotions instead of immediately seeking to fix everyone else's. As you reclaim your energy, the energy that was scattered across dozens of other people's problems, you begin to feel something you may have forgotten: your own aliveness. Your creativity returns. Your dreams resurface. Your capacity for joy, which was dampened by constant emotional labor, begins to regenerate. And here's what happens in the world around you as you undergo this transformation. Reality shifts. Not because the world changes, but because your relationship to the world changes. When you stop reacting from a place of desperation, people lose their ability to manipulate your emotions. When you stop seeking validation, you become unmanipulatable. When you stop fearing abandonment, you become someone who can only be genuinely loved. The relationships that remain in your life become cleaner, more honest, more reciprocal. The people who stay are the people who can love you without consuming you, who can value you without using you, who can connect with you without depleting you. This is not the end of love. It's the beginning of love that doesn't require you to sacrifice yourself. It's not the end of caring. It's the beginning of caring from a place of abundance rather than need. It's not the end of connection. It's the beginning of connections that honor your wholeness rather than demanding your fragmentation. As you sit in the quiet of this moment, feel the truth settling into your bones. Nothing and nobody will ever hurt you again. Not because you've become hard or closed, but because you've become whole. Not because you've rejected love, but because you've learned to love yourself enough to accept only love that honors your worth. Who are you when no one is watching? You are someone worthy of your own attention, your own care, your own respect. What part of you is waiting to be heard beneath the noise? The part that knows your own worth, that trusts your own wisdom, that values your own peace above others' comfort. What would happen if you finally chose yourself fully? You would discover that you are not only enough, you are everything you've been seeking in others. You would find that the love you've been giving so freely to everyone else is the love you've been starving yourself of. You would realize that the person you've been waiting for, to truly see you, to truly value you, to truly cherish you, has been you all along. In this knowing, you are free. In this freedom, you are reborn. In this rebirth, you are finally, fully, completely yourself. And that's self the one you've been protecting through boundaries, honoring through silence, nurturing through solitude. Itself is unbreakable, untouchable, and infinitely worthy of love.